of December 1939, Adolf Hitler had received a visitor from Norway. The 53-year-old Vidkun Quisling, still a serving officer and a brilliant mathematician, was the former Minister of Defense and founder of the new National Union, a party which embraced National Socialist-type principles. Quisling hated and feared Soviet communism. He thought the Russian attack on Finland heralded a much larger war in Scandinavia and proposed to use German assistance to take power in Norway, in order, as he said, to forestall occupation by the British, a civil war, and the Bolshevization of the whole country. Hitler advised him that Norway should remain neutral for the time being, but promised massive German support in the face of a British threat. Later that same day, Hitler ordered Oberkommando der Wehrmacht, or OKW, to begin work on Studi Nord, a contingency plan for the occupation of Norway. Grand Admiral Erich Raeder, Commander-in-Chief of the German fleet, played a central role. It was he who had set up the meeting between Quisling and Hitler. Control of the Norwegian coastline would give his submarines an increased radius of action, while his surface ships could more easily run the British blockade. The Navy's plan, presented on the 20th of January, called for landings along the entire coast, from Oslo to Tromsø, and helped shape Weserübung, or Operation Weser. The seizure of the Altmark turned Weserübung from a contingency to an operational plan. A furious Hitler ordered full speed ahead. Admiral Günther Leuchens, the commander of Germany's battle fleet, was tasked with implementing Weserübung. Leuchens, who had served in small boat squadrons throughout the First World War, understood the problems of littoral warfare. Control of the operation went to the army. General Nicholas von Falkenhorst, who had served in Finland in 1918, headed the world's first unified tri-service command, which subordinated naval and air units to the ground force commander. Summoned to the Chancellery on the 21st of February 1940, Falkenhorst was offered command of Weserübung and jumped at the chance. Told to come back at 1700 hours with a plan of campaign, Falkenhorst bought a travel guide, retired to his hotel room, and literally worked on the back of an envelope. He decided to use one division to capture each of Norway's major harbours: Oslo, Stavanger, Bergen, Trondheim and Narvik. Although not as detailed as the OKW plan, Falkenhorst's concept was very similar. Hitler approved it at once. In order to facilitate inter-service cooperation, Falkenhorst worked direct to Hitler, rather than through the Army Chief of Staff. Inter-service rivalry did not entirely disappear, but no other nation at that time could have rivaled the efficiency of these arrangements. Falkenhorst's most famous subordinate was Hitler's favorite general, the highly skilled Major General Eduard Dietl, commander of the 3rd Mountain Division. Dietl, fanatically loyal to his Führer, was a Bavarian, a mountaineer, who after the First World War joined the Nazi Party, becoming member number 120, which made him senior to Hitler. As a captain of the Bavarian General Staff in the 1920s, Dietl tried to sabotage military opposition to Hitler's attempted putsch, and later became one of Hitler's chief informants in the Reichswehr. Falkenhorst tasked his division with the capture of Narvik. Closer to Scapa Flow than to any German base, it would almost certainly prove the most difficult objective. Weserübung would require the deployment of the bulk of the German Navy. 2 battle cruisers, 2 old battleships, a pocket battleship, 2 heavy cruisers, 4 light cruisers, 14 destroyers, 20 torpedo boats, 50 minesweepers, and 31 U-boats. The most powerful were the battle cruisers Scharnhorst and Gneisenau. They displaced 31,800 tons and mounted a main armament of 9 11-inch guns, which were too small for ships of that size and quite outclassed by the 15 and 16-inch guns mounted on many British battleships. However, they were well armoured. had good anti-aircraft armament, and they were fast. The ship with the most awesome reputation was Lutzow, a pocket battleship. She displaced only 11,700 tons, but mounted 6 11-inch guns in 2 triple turrets. However, her armour was no better than that of a heavy cruiser, and her top speed of only 26 knots meant that she was slower than most modern battleships. Despite her formidable appearance, Lutzow and the other pocket battleship were products of a deeply flawed design. The heavy cruisers Admiral Hipper and Blücher, following a more conventional design, were among the most effective of their class in any navy of the world. They were heavily armoured, displaced 14,000 tons, and mounted 8 8-inch and 12 4.1-inch guns. Like the pocket battleships, many German destroyers were formidably armed with 5.9-inch guns, making them lethal in ship-to-ship actions with other destroyers. The U-boats, which were to form a flanking screen, were mainly the 865-ton Type 7Cs, armed with 4 bow and 1 stern torpedo tubes. These rugged and reliable boats were the workhorse of the German submarine service, but their crews were inexperienced. British naval superiority was immense. Germany relied on land-based aircraft to redress the balance. Just over 1,000 aircraft were detailed to support Weserberung, about 230 fighters, 270 bombers, and 500 transport aircraft. The period of maximum danger would lie between the beginning of the operation and the establishment of the first air bases in Norway, because aircraft based in Germany could range only over the southern third of Norway. The Luftwaffe's excellent Me-109 could just reach the southeast coast of Norway. Only the twin-engined Messerschmitt Bf-110 had the range to operate further north. The workhorse of German bomber squadrons, the Heinkel He-111H, had a relatively heavy bomb load, but lacked protection. A much better aircraft was the Junkers Ju-88, which had a greater range, was slightly faster, and could carry a bomb load only slightly smaller. The Ju-88 was equally adept as a fighter and a dive bomber. Once they'd established themselves in southern Norway, the Germans would be able to deploy the Junkers Ju-87 Stuka, the finest dive bomber in the world at that time, which would prove to be particularly effective against a large target like a ship. The campaign would also see the first operational employment of the Fallschirmjäger, the Luftwaffe's paratroops. Their task was to seize airfields in Denmark, a subsidiary operation codenamed Weserberung Sud, and at Stavanger and Oslo. They would go into action in Ju-52 transports, 18 fully equipped men in each aircraft. The bulk of German ground forces were to be drawn from 5 divisions: the 69th, 163rd, 181st, 196th, and 214th. 3 of these divisions, the 163rd, 181st, and 196th, had been formed in January 1940, and the other 2 had been created in the summer of 1939. These formations were composed largely of reservists, indicating a belief that if the Navy and Air Force were successful, the Army would have little to do. Nevertheless, specialist troops were attached to the expedition. Like the companies of Fallschirmjäger, they were charged with securing key objectives at the outset of the campaign. The most famous were the 2nd and 3rd Mountain Divisions, which were composed of Austrians, although they included a few Bavarians. The Innsbruck-based 2nd Mountain Division was composed almost entirely of Tyroleans, while the 3rd Mountain Division, originally part of the Austrian army, had been integrated into the Wehrmacht after the Anschluss. Its men hailed from Graz, and their commander was the famed Major General Eduard Dietl. The men, all genuine mountaineers, were used to conditions rather colder than even the most northern extremities of Norway. "280 miles to the west lay Scapa Flow, the main base of the British Home Fleet. In the spring of 1940, it comprised 14 battleships and battlecruisers, more than 24 heavy and light cruisers, and some 60 destroyers and 50 submarines. The home fleet